Oh, yeah. Some of the youngsters, I think, are heading off to spend a bit of time with John this evening. Good seeing you. Glad you could join us for a bit. Have a great evening. Any grown-ups want to join them? This is your opportunity. Get out now. So Exodus chapter 19 of Exodus. I would say, as I think about the book of Exodus, that this chapter is the apex. It's the high point that everything that we've been reading up until now has been leading to. It's just cast your minds back for a moment and just think how the book begins. It begins with the sort of the situation in Egypt, the slavery of the Israelites, their weak prayer unto God, and this great God who they haven't fellowship with, it seems, for such a long time, hears them from heaven and comes in power to save them. He raises up Moses, who's wandering out in the wilderness at the burning bush, speaks to him from that fire that doesn't extinguish this plant, and yet the flame is there. He hears God speaking to him, and he goes down to Egypt. And the mission, if you remember what God said to him there, was go and bring the people back to me here. Now, the burning bush is on Mount Sinai. So he's gone down there and he's confronted Pharaoh. Pharaoh's hardened his heart. Miracles have happened. Incredible demonstrations of God's saving power. The ocean, the seas opened, and they've come out into the wilderness. And now, chapter 19, after this great big shake-up in the camp of the organization, Moses reorganized, and everything's in order. And now they arrive. That's the opening, chapter 19, verse 1. The arrival, they've come to the very place that from the beginning God said, this is the place. Bring them here. This is the place where I'm going to meet the people. They're going to meet me. They'll have seen my power. They'll have heard great things. It's time for them to meet me. And this is the place, and this is the time. And obviously running on from this, the next great, glorious bit of the book, 10 Commandments, but everything else for the rest of the book happens at Mount Sinai. This is the place. They've come to the mountain, to the mountaintop. So, important chapter. Point made. Added to that, obviously, what's happening here is that as they arrive at the mountain, and you've got the whole congregation, the whole nation, all the people gathered at the foot of the mountain, and God offers them a covenant, a relationship that will be with them and their generations, that will endure forever, if they will obey his voice. There's quite a moment where they've been saved, they've come, and now this is the basis on which we're going to relate to each other. We can relate to each other. We can have a relationship with each other going forward into the future if this great covenant offer that the Lord personally makes to the people at this mountaintop moment. Now, third thing I think in this passage that is absolutely extraordinary and critical, and I hope you gathered it. When Moses was at the burning bush, he heard God speak to him. Now, I don't know about all of you, and I trust you've heard God speaking to you, but I'd be concerned if any of you have heard God speaking to you in an audible voice. Now, I may be wrong, I may be casting aspersions, but I suspect that nobody here has heard the audible voice of God. But Moses heard it. And in this chapter here, God plans that at the perfect place, at the time of this offer, that he is going to reveal himself to the people. They are going to hear his actual voice. They're going to hear it with their ears. Not just the voice of God in their spirits, in their hearts, in their minds, but with their actual ears. They're going to hear God's voice. And that is going to be the confirming sign that he is, and also that Moses is his prophet. So quite a lot going on in chapter 19, isn't there? They've arrived at the final destination. The offer of a relationship is being made, and they get to actually hear the voice of God. Pretty impressive stuff. What do I want to talk to you about? I want to talk to you tonight about worship. I want to talk to you about coming to God for worship, coming to worship God. What's involved in coming to worship God? Now, it's all well and good giving my wonderful opinion on chapter 19 of Exodus, but there is a far better resource that we can turn to, and that is the Bible itself. Now, some of you were here in the morning series, and you heard me preaching through the book of Hebrews, and you'll know that in Hebrews and chapter 12, the writer of the book of Hebrews preaches from Exodus chapter 19 and makes a very powerful application to Christians. Do you remember that one of the great subject matters of the book of Hebrews is about, forsake not the gathering of yourselves together, right? This great call that the church of God is to be visible and to be seen, because our God is not visible. You can't see God, you can't hear God, but you can see God's people, and we are the sign, the evidence. Our faith is the evidence that he is to people here in the world. And in chapter 12, if you wanted to turn there, because I'm just going to do a short reading from Hebrews chapter 12, he picks up on this incident we have recorded for us in Exodus 19 and makes a powerful application to Christians who gather for worship, who gather together in Christian groups, in churches, and come and worship God together, congregationally. And that's what we're about, isn't it? So I'm going to start the reading from verse 18. And he starts in the negative. So he takes chapter 19 of the book of Exodus, and he treats it negatively as a thing to contrast against something else. He says, you have not come, you Christians, you have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what he commanded. Even if an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem. You've come to the city of the living God. You've come to 1,000 upon 1,000 of angels in joyful assembly. You've come to the church of the firstborn. You've come to those whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God. You've come to the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it, then, that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? And at that time his voice shook the earth, but now he is promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, the created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. Can you see what's going on there? Can you see that he's basically taking Exodus chapter 19 and the event that took place there, that's described there, and contrasting it, this phenomenal contrast between that and this. In other words, he's saying that what you have, you Christians have, the Christian experience is more glorious, more astonishing, more wonderful than that. And there they were. They heard the actual voice of God. And he's talking to this group of Christians, and he's saying, that's nothing compared to what you're doing when you assemble and gather yourself together for worship. You have come to Zion. Do you see the substance of it? Now, and verse 28 is a key verse, isn't it? Therefore, since we're receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God. They worshiped God then, didn't they? In fear and trembling, God struck the fear of God into them, right? Reverence and awe. But even though what we've come to is something with such a different character, isn't it? The joyful assembly of the angels. Nevertheless, the outcome, the conclusion in the mind of the writer of Hebrews is that the consequence should be a reverent and awful worship. Not that kind of awful. So there we are. I love great things, like great moments. Sometimes they're quite simple things, aren't they? But I remember once, 2010, do you remember 2010? We had a lot of snow, really heavy, heavy snow. And I was out in Aberangeth, which is like somewhere between Machynlleth and Dolgellau. Anyway, and there was a waterfall. It was all frozen. It was absolutely beautiful. It was such a beautiful, still place. And I was on the phone to my brother. It just kind of seemed a bit profane, this beautiful, quiet moment there. I was nattering away on the phone. And as I was talking to him on the phone, I suddenly saw something in this kind of water pool. And it was a salmon trying to jump up there. It just took my breath away. It was just such an amazing moment in all the snow and the ice and this fish striving to get up this waterfall. It was amazing. It just hushed my heart. It just kind of filled me with awe and wonder. And then I saw a movement down by the waterfall, and it was an otter. I have never seen an otter in the wild like that. It literally took my breath away. It is wonderful when we have incredible experiences, visceral, personal, physical experiences. And the history of religion, if you want to put it like that, is this attempt in these glorious buildings and these incredible robes and the smells and the bells and the sense of awe and sublimity and incredible music that's played and the sense of procession and all the rest of it is in some way trying to humanly manufacture this sense of the sublime, the wonderful, the glorious, and so somehow instill in the hearts of the people that there is this sense of God. Through stimulus, and I suppose you could say in our own times that maybe that's something that started in the Middle Ages or earlier and has been carried on, kind of came to a bit of a hiatus in the mid-1600s. But there's a revival of that sort of thing. Okay, let's close all the windows here. We'll black it all out, and we'll have a stage. We'll have lights, and we'll have a smoke machine, and we'll have some incredible things, and it'll be super stimulating. And we're going to spice up worship. And we're going to give everybody this incredible sense of God, how great God is. And, we get that. We're human beings. We've got sight and sound and, we're physical creatures, aren't we? And I get all of that. But there's a sense in which what is being said there in Hebrews is that those people in Exodus chapter 19, They had all the fireworks, if I can put it like that. Quite literally, there was real fire in front of them. Real smoke, black billows of smoke. They heard the actual voice of God. They'd seen the sea open. They'd seen, they'd smelt, they'd heard, they'd touched. They had such a physical and visceral experience of God. But these people to whom the writer is writing is saying, you haven't seen God. You cannot see Jesus. You cannot see Mount Zion. You cannot see the angels, the thousands and thousands of angels. You can have a very vivid imagination, and maybe you can have some sort of an imaginative experience. But whatever your imagination is, I'm telling you, it's not it. That's not it. You can't see any of that. In fact, on the contrary, from the 1600s onwards, there was a deliberate attempt to remove the statues and remove the paintings and remove the sort of effusive music and remove all the stimuluses and extra stimuluses of human manufacture, to remove and to come back to some sort of simplicity, almost to meet in a plain white box. Because there is something more glorious than what we can make or create or show or see, and we can see it if we use the eyes of our faith. Because the only way that you can access Zion and Jesus Christ and this great company of angels is by faith. You remember in Hebrews, we see Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, looking unto Jesus. How do we look unto Jesus? Where am I supposed to look? Which direction am I, Muslims say, let's look at Mecca. Jews say, let's face the Wailing Wall. Well, how do you? By faith. By faith, we look unto Jesus. By faith, we come to worship the invisible God who is. And he's shown himself. And the only way that we can do that is by the exercise of our faith. So I had quite an interesting experience in the week because the Banner Ministers of Truth conference was taking place down in Stoke, and I popped down there. I thought I'd go and hear one session. There was one preacher I'd never heard of his name. He came from Northern Ireland. I thought I'd just pop in. I had a couple of people I wanted to see, and I wanted to go and hear at least one session, just stimulate my soul. As it turns out there, he was preaching from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 18 following, focusing on chapter 28, which of course is a commentary on Exodus 19, which I was preparing for, having already just been preaching through Hebrews. So I did certainly feel that this was a good and opportune moment. Very, very helpful session that it was. And he was referring us, and I don't want to, if you want to drop off at the moment, Stephen, that's absolutely fine, because Stephen was there. But there's a man by the name of David Clarkson, and David Clarkson was the person who took over, no relative of Jeremy Clarkson. That's a joke that the minister who was sharing about David Clarkson also shared with us. That David Clarkson was the person who came into the pulpit in the Congregational Independent Church in London after John Owen. Now, some of you will know who John Owen is, some people won't. But John Owen, probably, if you did a survey of the greatest contributor to Protestant theological thinking from this country, John Owen is the one. You probably are more influenced by John Owen than you know, in terms of your understanding of the Trinity, in terms of your understanding of the work of the Holy Spirit. Almost all of that Protestant thinking has come through the mind of this guy, John Owen. Now, if he was the guy in the pulpit, and then you get to be the person who comes in after him, that's quite a job, right? But David Clarkson was the guy who came into the pulpit after John Owen. And he wrote, in those days, they'd have amazing, so you think, I'm a long preacher, they would preach for 4 hours, right? 4 hours straight or something like that. So like, if you want me to do that, I can do that, but that's what he did, and they were okay with it. And David Clarkson preached this long, extended sermon on the supremacy of public worship over private worship. So more important than your devotions, more important than you getting up in the morning and reading your Bible and praying, more important than you and your prayer partner getting together and praying and talking about the Bible together, more important than sitting down and reading the Bible one-to-one with a friend, more important than getting around the family table and praying with the children and reading a psalm together and giving thanks to God around your table, more important than the house group, more important than the prayer meeting, more important, this is the mountain where all of those other things that we do, that we accumulate, and we do over and over again, week by week, month by month, day by day, accumulate into a spiritual culture, a spiritual temperature that then resolves together into a corporate moment, a corporate mountain where we come together and worship God. And then we go and we do it all over again. And again, and again, and again. And even all these weekly gatherings, these accumulate into something, the culture, the temperature, the community of God's people builds and builds until there's a greater sense of God in the church at large, the corporate worship of the church. Now, Warren Peel, who was bringing this sermon to our attention and talking about this with us, was asking this question, let's face it. Why is this the most important thing that you are going to do all week? Is it the most important thing you're going to do all the week? Is it this the high point, your congregational gathering this morning? Is this actually the most? I mean, I'm sure there's lots of important things, lots of good things going on in your lives. But is this the mountain? Okay? Is this Zion? That's the question, I think, that we're being put to. Because the fact of the matter is we all come together, and it's the usual suspects. It's a bit like a lineup, isn't it, in a police profile. It's all the same people. You see all the same faces week by week in our plain walls. And actually, the singing was very lovely tonight, I have to say. But you can't always rely on that, right? And in lots of ways, there isn't much attractive about us or excellent. Not many noble amongst us and all the rest of it. It's a nice little plain building. Looking at it from the outside, it's got a face only a mother could love. It's made of red bricks. This doesn't commend itself to you. This in itself is not the mountain, surely, is it? This isn't the mountain in and of itself. And yet, this kind of Puritan simplicity was stripping away things, not to remove all those distractions so that there is nothing left, no other operation left for us. If we're going to actually worship God, the only stimulus is our faith that He actually is and hears and receives our worship. And that is an act of faith. And remember what Hebrews says? Without faith, it is impossible to please God. In one sense, the fear and trembling that the people experienced in the book of Exodus chapter 19 as they heard and felt and smelt was wonderful. It was extraordinary, but it was promoted by that physical experience. But your simple act of faith in worship is more pleasing to God. It is a purer and more perfect worship that you offer. It is a more acceptable worship that you're offering because, like it says in Peter, though you have not seen Him, yet you love Him. And the day is coming, friends, when every eye will see Him and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that He is Lord. But for those who have exercised and built this relationship through faith with him, expressing our love and our confidence in him through faith, you will be set inside this city that this passage speaks of. You're going to be the citizens of this kingdom, this unshakable, unmovable kingdom. You are the people of God. By faith, by faith, by faith. So just think about it. Just think about it. We've sung our songs tonight. It was lovely, wasn't it, that we sang together and harmonized our voices and all the rest of it. But the key thing is that as we do this, as we exercise faith and devote our worship, our love towards God, we are in Zion. We are teleported. We are transported by that act of faith to Zion and this innumerable company of angels who we cannot see, who cannot hear, worshiping God. And all the saints that ever was, and all the saints that are, and all the saints that will be, worshiping God. And Jesus Christ, the King of the church, worshiping God. And you are part of the cosmic concert of praise that all the creation delights in. All the heavens declare the glory of God. And in that act of faith, we join in with that. At the same time, while millions of people do not do so and remain locked out and in the darkness and away from all this glory. We are a special possession. We are a royal priesthood. We are a holy nation. And you're part of something so glorious. Doesn't look it, does it? It doesn't look it. But this, what we're doing, the primacy of public worship. I've got two other points. You bear that? I'm going to talk about the character of public worship. And I want to talk about the object of public worship. So the second thing I want to say to you is this. So I really, most of it has already been said, so it'll kind of accumulate and you've probably got the point, right? So all this private and personal devotion, all this personal love for God that you accumulate and that you come and you pull together, we bring to this favored moment, these favored moments. You see, do you remember all the way through Hebrews, and we thought about it in other passages as well, about the importance of manifesting the kingdom. So how will they know you're my disciples except that you love one another? Well, it is great to worship God in your... I know people who absolutely insist that they're Christians. But do they go to church? Not for me. So just tell me how you are going to love one another if you're actually not even going to meet one another. I think it's a lot easier, perhaps, to love some people by not meeting them. But church pushes us into this sanctifying place. It brings us to the mountain. It brings us to the city where we're all in this great place together with all this great company. And there, our act of faith, because sometimes loving people is just an act of faith. All of that accumulates into something that delight. It is the place of God's delight. You see in Acts chapter 19, it was wonderful that he spoke to Moses, and Moses spoke heard his voice. It's wonderful that one person gets to know God. But the aim and the object was that all of these people should hear his voice. All of these people should come to God. God is content with Jesus Christ. He's enough. He is his delight. He's enough. But he wants you and all these people around the world of every tribe and tongue and nation all come to the throne, come together, not in some egotistical moment, but because we become one with all of the creation as we come in worship. and everything is put back as it should be. And there is proper, deep, lasting, real peace. The very thing that, listening to James's prayers, you're pretty clear, aren't you? We don't have right here. Because the whole creation, all these things can be shaken and troubled and disturbed. But this lasts forever. This lasts forever. So how are you going to prepare? Did you notice in Exodus chapter 19 the way they had to wash themselves and make certain preparations to come and hear God? How do you prepare for public worship? What do you do in the run-up to it? Do you wing worship? Now, okay, I understand that sometimes winging it is all you've got. Okay, right? We get that. Grace multiplies, doesn't it, as it's needed. But do you prepare? Do you pray? Are you expectant? Are you considering these things? Are you laboring? Are you working? Are you invested? Are you committed? I'm looking at you. Of course you are. Of course you are. I'm not asking it in that sense. But do you see the point? And this washing, and I know, I just cannot miss a preaching opportunity without mentioning baptism. I'm just going to do it very quickly and get it out of the way, and then you can all switch back on again, okay? But this idea of being washed, the need to be clean, to come to worship. Have you been baptized? And before that, obviously, more significant washing. Do you know your sins forgiven? Are your sins washed away? Is your conscience clear? Are you right with God? These are important questions. How are we going to worship God if we're not right with him? How are we going to worship God if we haven't found the forgiveness of sins? How are we going to worship God if we haven't our consciences cleansed? How are we going to worship God if we haven't presented our bodies as living sacrifices? How are we going to worship God? Believe and be baptized. End of baptism sermon. You've probably got it all memorized, haven't you? I do it so often. And communion. And examining ourselves. And not just looking back at our baptisms saying, I'm a baptized person, but coming again and again and examining ourselves and just checking and preparing and being thorough, being serious about relationships and how we relate to other people in the life of the church. And coming to worship with a sense, I suppose, of real seriousness, because we have something more glorious than they had. And even though, I would say, one thing we probably need to bring out is, because in the passage, going back to Hebrews, am I preaching on Hebrews or Exodus? I'm not quite sure tonight. But if we are preaching a little bit on Hebrews anyway, the outworking of the Hebrews chapter at the end in verse 28 is worship with reverence and awe. And you can see that in Exodus 19, reverence and awe was very much the order of the day. But there's something else in Hebrews. Did you notice how the angels are dressed? The thousands upon thousands at Zion. Did you notice what they're wearing? It's quite interesting what people wear. Did you notice? Dressed in festal garments. They have come to celebrate. They have come to rejoice. They have come and they are dressing up in such a way that they are glad in Zion. And I think we need to make sure that public worship, we're talking about the character of public worship, is characterized with reverence and awe and seriousness. But if we sit there with our long faces and our frowns in our grayest grays, I get it, but where is the joy? The joy of our salvation, the joy of God, the joy of him who's our Father, the joy of Jesus Christ, the joy of all the company of the saints, the joy of the singing and sound of angels, the joy of the great city to which we belong. So in terms of the character of public worship, reverence or joy, right? Don't you agree? Because we have a better covenant. I'm going to make it brief. Last point. Those people, back in Exodus chapter 19, they didn't even have a Bible, friends. Moses had not put pen to paper or parchment or tablet or whatever it was. The process hadn't begun. All these scattered people had these anecdotes and stories that had been handed down to them through the generations of what the Lord had done for their ancestors in the past. And they had this amazing experience of God's dealing with them in those 3-4 month period of their life. This intense experience. And it's described in chapter 19, verse 4 of the book of Exodus. I'm actually in Exodus for a minute. Acts 19, verse 4. And God says to them, consider how I bore you on angels' wings. It's good to stop and think about how it is that you came to be where you are, isn't it, sometimes? About the incredible grace of God that has been at work. They could reflect on the amazing grace of God that had been at work in their life, that had brought them to that moment, brought them to the mountain. But you, friends, have so much more. Yeah. You haven't been born here. Yes, there has been incredible acts of providence. You're alive today and you've got health and strength to be able to be here. You've been born here on angels' wings. But more than that, and I alluded to it in my prayers at the beginning, you were born here on the slender shoulders of Jesus of Nazareth on a very cruel cross in rapt agony. And on that very narrow base, all your sin and mine weighed. The wrath of God that should be towards you, towards us, was assuaged and absorbed in himself. And consequently, he literally has borne you to this place. It's not just to Ebenezer Baptist Church. Angels have done that. But to Zion, Jesus has brought you to God. He's given you the opportunity to worship God with a clear conscience. Jesus has done it on his precious shoulders. You are so rich, friends, and all these books here, all the amazing things that God has done through the past, it's all there before you. You can look at it any time, or you can come and listen to me talking about it for a long, long time. Or Ben Slatter, who went over a bit this morning as well. But you didn't mind, did you? Because it was good. Because it was good. Sinai was their place. It was the agreed place, wasn't it? The burning bush had agreed that that was the place where God was going to speak. But do you know, notice again, Exodus chapter 19, verse 4, he born on angels' wings. He says, but God says, ultimately I brought you to myself. He's brought us into a relationship with him. That's what this is all about. That we should know God. And in knowing him, love him. And in loving him, worship him. And do all these things that he's calling us to do, including gathering together, congregating together like this, week by week in these ordinary circumstances, and do something extraordinary. So don't give up. Okay, last thing, and then I will be quiet. I'll try anyway. Verse 29, Hebrews, says God is a consuming fire. God is a consuming fire. It talks about worship, that God is a consuming fire. Now think about Jesus for a moment at worship. I love one of the things he says of himself, picking up from the Psalms. He said, zeal for your house has consumed me. Do you remember that verse? Jesus is absolutely consumed with God and his glory. Absolutely consumed, like a burnt offering, burnt to a crisp. Nothing left. Everything, he's given everything to God. Everything. Worship, right? Full-hearted worship, spirit, body, and soul. You think about perhaps the The seraphim, these incredible creatures, like people love discovering amazing creatures. They go down to the bottom of oceans in little tub things, don't they, with their cameras and see these slithery, slidey things. Oh, we didn't know those were there. There's all these incredible creatures in heaven. Seraphim. Do you know what the word seraphim means? I'm sure the Bible scholars here will tell you, the burning ones. When God made the seraphim, he didn't make them naturally as combusted creatures. They weren't sort of by nature on fire. It's because they're so close to God that they burn. Because God is a consuming fire. Because Jesus is so close to God, that's why he is consumed by God. That's why the angels are consumed. They're described in one place as flames of fire because they're close to God. And do you remember what the disciples felt as they walked down the Emmaus road and Jesus was teaching from the Word and showing them all these things? Did not our hearts burn within us? Because they were close to God and the Spirit was at work. When the Holy Spirit was poured out on the church, flames of fire came upon them. This sense of this nearness, the nearness of God. Our God is a consuming fire. You get close to him, you burst into flame. Your hearts burst into flame. Worship, a flame, an eternal kingdom, a bright light. You don't put a lamp under a bushel. You set it on a lampstand. People whose hearts are on fire for God. Worship, worship. Oh, I could go on. I'm going to stop. Who is the object of our worship? It's him. It's him. Seems suitable. Paul's been very helpful tonight. We're going to rely on you again, please. The song, Immortal, Invisible,